All right, so gotta hate it when that happens. All right, so before the weekend, we're gonna look at some more multiple choice questions to help build your skill set and to give you some insight into what you might expect on the coming midterm on November 2nd and or the final exam. So we are looking at a selection of questions, and I'm not promising you that these questions will be on the midterm. So I hope that you're not under the impression that, man, if I just memorize the answer to these questions, I'm gonna get 100%. No, I'm really selecting these from other exams. So please keep that in mind. It'd be silly of me just to present the entire test and then the test would really not be that valid. So let's look at number 37%. A student looking at the above issues would most likely be investigating. So that at that point, I might do one of two things. So I've read the stem, the question, and now I might go to the source and see the group, or I might consider the four options just to kind of see what my alternatives are. So up at the top, we have cost of World War I, severity of the Great Depression, rise of communism. As soon as I start looking at this list, I'm thinking, oh, this is the beginning of chapter 9. These are those topics at the beginning of chapter 9. So a student looking at the beginning of chapter 9 would most likely be investigating A, key events of the first half of the 20th century that shaped the global village. Wow, that really does sound right, doesn't it? That all of those things happen in the first half of the 20th century, and they do shape the village because it creates a paradigm shift away from competition towards the need for Bretton Woods Conference and cooperation. Reasons the USA abandoned isolationism and defended liberty. Well, some of them, like rise of communism, I could see a fit. But why would they, in light of the cost of World War I, abandon isolationism? In fact, after World War I, the United States goes back and practices more isolationism. So it's not going to be that. A growing acceptance, the viability of the zero-sum theory. I think it's actually the opposite, right? Instead of a growing acceptance, it's a growing understanding of the cost of the zero-sum theory. The need for a paradigm shift of economic foreign policy. Well, we did talk about a paradigm shift. It was a paradigm shift away from individualism towards collectivism, but everything up there is not economic. Some of the things there are the Great Depression, but many of them are talking about a paradigm shift not just of economics, but of foreign policy in general, including politics and social aspects. Therefore, the umbrella that all of those points fits under would be A. I thought it was A. I still had to explore B, C, and D. And that's a good question because there's a poll. There's some reason why people might select the other answers. But the best answer would be A. Let's take a look at the two questions above that. So it's another one of those questions where there's a source, and in my mind, there's a lot of reading there because I'm not an avid reader. So I want to read with a purpose. I don't want to read it too many times. So I'm going to read the question first, the stem. The example that depicts consumer activism. So while I read through those four things, I want to say which one is consumer activism. So I can do that. I can certainly do that. So I'm going to highlight the term consumer activism on my exam. And then when I go through these, I'm just matching these four things and saying which one is consumer activism. So to get number 35 right, you need to know what consumer activism is. And then number 36, examples of corporate responsibility. It's very much the same skill as 35, it's just a different term. So here, once again, we have a set of questions, two questions, that highlights the importance of language. That in social studies, if you know the vocabulary, the course gets a whole lot easier. Multiple choice gets a whole lot easier. So as we're going through the course, if I'm using language, if the textbook's using language, if some of the supplementary videos use language that you don't understand, you really need to ask for help, or you need to find out those words on your own. It's probably easier to ask for help. And I would recommend that you do that from day 1 in 20 and from day 1 in 30. That language building will be critical for multiple choice success. Multiple choice is half your mark. So it does come down to the key building blocks of the questions, the language. Sometimes it comes down to people, that's why we've talked about cast of characters. Sometimes it comes down to case studies, but here it comes down to language. So an example that depicts consumer activism. Consumer activism is also a term you saw in grade 9 social. We have the coffee shop, the Capo Cafe in Edmonton, only serves coffee to its customers in reusable mugs in an effort to reduce waste. In example 1, it's the corporation, it's the company that's being active, not the consumer that is trying through some kind of activity create change. So it's not the best example of consumer activism. If it had said that, Russ McBride will only go to stores that use reusable mugs or allow him to use his reusable mug, then maybe that could be consumer activism. But here, the action is on the part of the company. This company only serves, right? So it's the verb, the action in this descriptor comes back to the company, so it can't be that. Many people now use reusable grocery bags instead of plastic or paper bags. Is that consumer activism? Well, consumers are taking an action there. I might put a maybe there. I cross this one off, I'm going to put an M for maybe. Tim Hortons, a popular coffee shop chain in Canada, is trying to find ways to make their paper coffee cup biodegradable by using a cornstarch-based liner. Much like 1, 3 is based on the company. So 1 and 3 are more likely down here, although that's not one of my options. Oh, yeah, it is C. 1 and 3 are more likely to be fitting here than it is to be fitting here. And before I circle 1 and 3 here, I'm going to make sure I read number 4. In Canada, people who buy high-efficiency furnaces are eligible for a rebate from the federal government. So this isn't corporations, this is the government trying to create change. So I'm definitely going to go with 1 and 3 down here, because those are the ones where the companies or corporations are trying to act responsibly or to entice consumers to do so. So now I'm left with the option of, is 2 or is 4 talking about consumer activism? Who can explain the logic to me of why 2 is a better answer than 4? Who can explain that logic to me, why 2 might be a better answer than 4? Oh. Let me just get to Paul.
Good afternoon. Not until 12:30.
Yep. All right. I took care of that phone call. Who can explain why it's 2 might be a better example than 4? Yes.
2 is talking directly about people. Well, 4 is talking about how the government will provide for them.
Okay. So 2 is talking directly about people. People are making a choice. It's not government or corporations that are directing them to do so. It's people making the choice on their own. It's the consumer that's being active. Consumer activism. So, can you guys see the difference there? Hopefully I'm not making it seem too easy and then suddenly the test is going to be more difficult. But I am picking lots of different questions here from different exams. So, speaking of which, let's jump to a different exam. Let's jump to this one. Now this one, it has the answer underlined. So, good news, we know what the answer is. But now we're going to try to reverse engineer it. Much like the United States Air Force did with the, alien crafts that crashed at Roswell, and that's how they got stealth technology, right? They were reverse engineered those spaceships from the aliens, because aliens exist. You believe in aliens, right? Of course you do. So we're gonna, like the U.S. Air Force did, we're we're going to reverse engineer these questions. We know the answer, but do we know why it's the answer? So again, faced with this question, I would read the question, I'd read the stem. This is the stem, these are the distractors. I'd read the stem first, and then I would look at the source with a purpose, rather than looking at it not knowing why. The speaker's statement about proportional sharing. So now, when I go to the source, I'm going to pay particular attention to this proportional sharing. This is heightened my, oh man, this is what I'm looking for. The speaker statement about proportional sharing is mainly saying that NAFTA is something. So as soon as I see NAFTA, I start thinking, okay, what do I know about NAFTA? You know, it's a free trade agreement. It's the North American Free Trade Agreement between Mexico, United States, and Canada. It was signed in 1994, yada, yada, yada. So I have this background information, and then I go up to it, and I'm going to be reading it, and I'm going to be looking for this idea about proportional sharing. NAFTA includes an outrageous proportional sharing, so it's right there. So now I'm like heightened awareness. NAFTA includes an outrageous. So we already know that with regards to proportional sharing, this person thinks it's outrageous. It's not a good thing. So even just stopping there, I'm probably going to get rid of B, going to promote greater equality, creating stable international markets, increasing trade. I might be able to even get A right just by getting to that fourth word, outrageous. Because B, C, and D are all consequences that are positive. So why would you say something's outrageous if it leads to something good? So because they use the word outrageous with this statement that I'm looking for, I'm probably going to go with A already. I'm going to keep going through the question, but I want you to see just how if you slow down, the answers come to the surface. NAFTA includes an outrageous proportional sharing provision that grants other NAFTA nations rights in, and I can't pronounce this, like it's the mask that's getting in the way. I heard it from Will, so he definitely said it, to a share of another country's natural resources. So basically, the United States, because they signed NAFTA, they have access to Canada's oil. So, how is that a threat to Canada's sovereignty? Well, what is sovereignty? Sovereignty is independence. Sovereignty is autonomy. It means that you're self-governing, that you have control over your own affairs, your own, in this case, natural resources. Canada doesn't necessarily have control over our natural resources because we signed this agreement, and because of it, the United States has been given access forever to our resources. So you can see how it's a threat to our sovereignty. Because now we can't make a decision and say, you know what, we're not going to sell oil to the United States anymore. No, you signed this agreement, you have to sell oil to the United States. That you have an obligation to the United States and they have a right to your oil because you've entered into NAFTA. That, by definition, is a threat to our sovereignty. Here they talk about natural gas instead. Thus, if Canada were to suffer a natural gas shortage, if, for example, Pipeline Blue, it could not cease or even substantially cut back exports to the U.S. in order to give priority to our needs, but we would have to reduce Canadian consumption and continue our obligation to the U.S. So suddenly we have less natural gas, but we have an obligation with NAFTA that we're going to sell them, so many billion cubic, whatever natural gas liters, gallons. What is natural gas measured in? Cubic liters of gas? Seems like a science question. So we're going to say we have an obligation to sell them 1 million units of it, and now because of this Pipeline Blue, we can only give them 500,000. They're going to say, you know what, we're still going to expect our 1 million every day. And you're going to have to make good the lag by using less yourself. So that's why it's a threat to our sovereignty, is now we have to put someone else's needs ahead of ours. So the United States actually has more access to our resources than we do. Seems absurd. That was one of the problems with NAFTA. So do you see how we can come to the answer of A there? Next up, in the future, Canada and many countries around the world may have to come to terms with proportional sharing of what economic sector. Now, you could make an argument that in the future, yeah, lumber's going to be valuable, that chemicals will be valuable, and technology will too. So there's a pull to each one. But because we live in a planet where clean water is becoming more and more scarce, and we already have in excess of 1 billion people living without it on a daily basis, you can see how we might have to share our water, especially in a place like Canada where we have more fresh water than any other country in the world. So in the future, provinces like Manitoba, they're going to be the have provinces. They're going to be the wealthy ones because they have the commodity water that others need. Much like Alberta of the past had oil that others need, Manitoba of the future has water that others need. The speaker of the statement argues in favor of something. So I read the question, I read the stem, and I'm like, okay, now all I have to do is go through the statement and see what do they like. Now, if I want to, I can pre-plan a little bit and see what my options are. Or I can just read through it and kind of like summarize what is it that they like. Implementing government involvement in the economy. So I can also say, okay, let's do this one at a time. I'm going to take one of them and just see if they link up. Smart technology is so amazing. Oh, now my mouse doesn't work. Oh, maybe that's not the right mouse? No, that was the right mouse. Honestly, I hate close. There we go. So the speaker of the statement argues in favor of something. We're looking for evidence that it's arguing in favor of implementing government involvement in the economy. In May of 2006, a politician stated that Northern Alberta's economic future is incredibly bright. But what does that success really mean if the area is unable to offer their infrastructure, amenities, and quality of life its residents are working so hard to enjoy? So, when this person being quoted says that the area needs infrastructure, it needs amenities, it needs to help its residents with quality of life, then the speaker is saying who's going to fulfill those roles? Who's going to provide infrastructure to Northern Alberta? Who's going to provide the amenities that people need to raise their quality of life? What it's actually saying is that the government needs to get involved in the economy. This is called modern liberalism. Modern liberalism is freedom through government. That we can only have a good life when the government involves themselves into our economic lives. Modern liberalism is a shift away from individualism towards collectivism. Modern liberalism is a reaction to the suffering of the 20th century, of the Great Depression, where people became more desperate and understood that on their own they might not be able to solve their economic crisis. So here we have this quote saying that on our own we will not have enough infrastructure, amenities to ensure quality of life. So we need something, someone, to add those things to the economy, and that something or someone will be the government. Does that make sense? Next up, we have another recall question, where supporters of something believe these things, opponents believe these. The only way you get number 4 right, unless you guess it right, is to know the difference between what roles the WTO, the IMF, GATT, and NAFTA do. So, once you see things like US, Canada, Mexico, and that's all they're talking about, they're not talking about global stuff, then the pull should be to NAFTA for sure. Do a couple more and then I'll come by with the wipes, because it certainly doesn't take 5 minutes to wipe and then walk away. The cartoonist is most critical of. So we've done this question on past exams and lots of people pick A because it says WTO right here. And they're like, oh man, WTO, 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 oh, it must be A. But what do we actually have going on here? We have corporate America celebrating free trade. Free trade at last, free trade at last. Thank God Almighty we have free trade at last. And that's again a connection back to a quote after the abolishment of slavery in the United States. So it's being said ironically by the cartoonist to show that we have a new form of slavery. U.S. worker is being shackled with massive layoffs, vanishing worker rights, and workers abroad are being given slave working wages. So, are they critical of slave wages? That's only here. That doesn't take care of this part of the equation. Are they critical of the WTO? That's only one aspect. That's not dealing with NAFTA, which is this whip. What is it that shows all of the problems? It's not massive layoffs. This guy's not laid off. He has a job. What is created the umbrella of everything here? Free trade. So, there's lots of potential. I've seen people guess every answer to this one, because there's a little bit of clues for each thing here. But what includes everything that's happening in the cartoon? The only thing that holds it all together is free trade. Most appropriate title. There will be questions like this on your midterm and final, where it's like, okay, here's the source. What's a good title for it now? Most appropriate title. If you guess A up here, you're probably going to guess A down here and get 2 wrong. If you guessed C up here, you're going to guess C down here and get 2 wrong. And D, you'll get 2 wrong. But because this was free trade, then the answer down here should also be free trade. All right, I'm going to come by with a wipe and we'll call it a week.